then they become parents, and then they have children, and their children are screaming, yelling, and they still hit the kid because they're so frustrated they don't know what else to do. I mean, there's still some of that residual stuff going on of, well, I won't do this, yet they're in that moment, and then they're at the choice point whether to find a different way of parenting their children, or they're going to react instead of, you know, work through something. And so I think the biggest thing, that distinction I've seen over and over again is the choosing between reacting or finding another way to act through something, through all the different levels of the planes and reincarnation and being at the different choice points as we evolve.
Well, there's also something to be said, that's so true, Carly, but there's also something to be said that creativity and love don't have to do with choice. Because love is creating something out of nothing. So there's no choice. That's where freedom is, where it's not free to choose between one thing or another thing that have already been there in the world or been in your existence. But the acting out of complete freedom, where there is nothing there, you're just doing it out of the love for the deed itself. By the way, I might sound like I know something, but it's taken me 2,000 years to understand some of these basic things about love. I mean, some of the simplest things, which is why I have an understanding of being patient with people and not being judgmental. I see how it takes you so long to, what you say, Carly, to do it over and over again, make the same mistake over and over again until you see that that doesn't work. By the way, that's the case with the world. Hatred does not work, and violence does not work, but it seems to work because of the short time span that most people have in being in the world and thinking about the world. They think that violence and because it appears to work in one lifetime. You think you can have some, like you can conquer a country. Well, so what? I mean, and look at the way our politics works. So what if you can win a war or this or that? I mean, when you start to get serious about time frame and what Liz said about what epoch are we in? Well, by the way, we're in the cusp of the epoch, changing from the intellectual soul to the spiritual soul. So we all know, everybody knows how to think, or they think they know how to think. And that's the intellectual soul. But what we're talking about now is what is love, and how do you implement love in this world? And that's very difficult, particularly since we are in this world, and the world doesn't really believe in love. It doesn't. It believes in violence and hatred and tit for tat.
Maybe that's why people who are very loving are sometimes perceived as very naive and out of this world. And it's very hard for them to express themselves because they're always dominated by people who work through fear. And I think that's one of the major problems here. You cannot just be a loving spirit here because you're going to be dominated by others if you are only loving. So we teach this in schools, that you have to fight for what you want. That's not true.
The examples of that who are Martin Luther King, Thoreau, and Gandhi. Now, those people were very loving people, but the strength of that love is fantastic. Of course, that's what Martin Luther King was all about, this training people to exercise this kind of love. But you're right, most of the time it's a wishy-washy kind of thing that's not very strong. And by the way, one of the mistranslations of the Bible is blessed are the meek. Now that is a mistranslation because that means blessed are people like Martin Luther King and Thoreau and Gandhi. That's what meek means. And that means really to strengthen your astral body, your feelings, so that you have complete control of your feelings. And that's what meek means, to make that part of you meek. And make that part of you meek to your spiritual self. And that's a whole different meaning than it's been used by religions, blessed are the meek. Because this kind of thing is tremendous strength and endurance and insight, not at all what we think of as meek.
I think that understanding that we all have our own paths to wander is one of the most important things if you want to feel unconditional love. So even if people are bad, or doing bad stuff, we have to understand that they're here to experience this. And that's the hard part when you're a person or a physical person who you don't want to accept their deeds, but at the same time, they are here to experience that. So you have to have very much understanding for what other people are here to experience. You have to take a bigger perspective on that and to understand that they came here to experience exactly what they're experiencing here. So everything is allowed and everybody is walking their own paths. I think that is what unconditional love means in essence.
Yeah, I've been able to take that even a step further, Gordana. My mother couldn't understand how I could keep loving my brother, who was so mean and nasty to me. But I realized that I had killed him in a prior life. So here was my enemy who became my brother, and so I was so understanding about this, and it was really, I didn't stop loving him. I really understood just what you were saying, Gordana, but in a very real, practical way. And again, this is why I say that these insights are so important for you to be able to understand this thing practically and really experientially and very helpfully.
Andrew, what's coming up for me is the word empathy, because to have that, to be an empathetic soul, it's almost to feel empathy. We have to know that we have done that before, felt that before. So it's almost as if loving that person who did something bad, there's a sense of empathy that we can relate to that. And maybe this is also, in part the importance of understanding past lives, because there's a heightened sense of empathy for people doing what really seems like terrible, bad things, because we've been there.
Now, Carly has something interesting to talk about, because Carly is the first person I've gotten to know at all who's an empath. Is that right, Carly?
Yeah, I've had an interesting life. When I was younger, I used to walk around streets and I would literally start to almost convulse. I'd be feeling such intense pain and running up my arm or whatever, and I'd see the ambulance right there. And I was actually feeling the person having a heart attack in the ambulance. So, on top of the fact that I've had, there's a very interesting medical history. So I've had to learn how to, a lot of people as they're experiencing their empath skills or what have you, haven't learned to modulate between the different planes. So they're either completely always in the spiritual plane, or they're completely always here in the physical plane, or they walk around literally like an open beacon, like an open vessel. So they're experiencing things at such a deep visceral level. You have to literally learn how to. It's not like something you can necessarily turn off, if you will, but how to actually function and dull it a little bit, because otherwise you just can't function. It becomes really, really challenging to function. And interestingly enough, I've spent a lot of time. I've also done a lot of work in the entertainment business, so I've actually been a spiritual witness guru or whatever in houses, and we'd be the psychics that would go in and tell them we weren't allowed to. Our jobs would basically go in and shake. Let's say there's a couple. This is one case we're working on. So they'd have maybe 5 or 6 empaths go in, and all we could do was shake the people's hands. They could not talk to us at all. And then they would leave. And we would actually then have the chance to go through the entire apartment and feel and sense and experience, and then we'd have a meeting later on and tell them what was going on. So, and it's different. Some people are more heightened hearing, can hear the other side. Some people can see more. Some people can smell more, different things. The biggest thing you'll find is some of the most famous healers, the reason why they have extra weight, by the way, is not because they're heavy as in the essence of weight as in heavy. It's water. The water gives them, it's a certain frequency or vibration, if you will, for them to pick up, to actually pick up the vibrations, depending on what type of empath they are. And it's also it's twofold. One of them is the extra water allows them to hear. That's a typical one. The other one is actually an energetic barrier, because they feel so much the extra weight actually dulls out some of those senses. I mean, I could go on and on. It's just...
Yeah, but this is what I meant. Now, you are unusual that you've been able to control this fantastic ability that you have. But if you're not, you get completely out of line. Now, I've met people who are completely imbalanced because they feel so much even from animals and so forth. I mean, people, this one student I have is so devastated by the death of her cat. Now, I can see how you can feel the loss, but to get so devastated by feelings, what you're describing, Carly, is just exceptional ability to feel.
Well, I think it's another step beyond that, though. The other part of it is, how do we view death? Like, for example, I just did a show on conscious death and dying, and, you know, we treat animals better when they're passing away than we do humans. So what is our attachment to death, and what is our concept or our belief on death or ideology on death? For me, it's a celebration. I know if someone's transitioned, they're on to some other wonderful experience, whatever that is. I don't view death as morose. I don't view death in terms of funerals, obituaries. I don't even use that language. That is like so far removed from my language. So people look at me and go, "Oh, you're so cold. You're not crying. You're not grieving."
I have that problem too. I have to hide that.
Yeah, it's celebration mode. Like, I know they're onto some new transition or some new celebration. So I think a lot of it is perception and how we choose to feel or experience those words, and what we give meaning to the word death. Or the same thing with the word love. What word, or what our connotation or experience of love is, and how we portray that in the world, how we live that.
I think that the grieving and the other stuff that you're talking about is more about our own ego and our own, that we miss the person that is dead. We want them back. The person is in a better place. So it is a cause to celebration, but it's hard for us because we want them here around us physically. We want to touch them, feel them, talk to them, and we really cannot do that. So maybe that's why we're having those connotations to death, because our society is afraid of talking about death, is afraid of talking about spirit, is afraid of talking about the other side. We're all about ourselves all the time, so maybe that's why. I was thinking about something else that was very interesting. You were talking about water and excess water in the body. And maybe that's why people feel more or are intuitively into spirit when there's a full moon. Because the full moon stops your water. You have more water in your body when there's a full moon. So that's why we go crazy when there's full moon, because we can't deal with our feelings then. Maybe it just struck my mind when you were talking about that maybe that's why full moon is affecting us that way it is.
That's the one.
You're correct. You're absolutely correct. Yeah. There's been studies. I'm involved in a lot of different studies in the background. Some scientists with vibration and frequency and water and all sorts of other things. But anyways, studies and on studies show, there are some hospitals now that will not operate on full moons, because there's more blood loss, there's like a lot of other things, that are going on. Now, not all places, obviously it's an emergency, they're to operate. However, more and more in Eastern cultures, European cultures, and in some places, they will attempt not to operate on a full moon. Depending on, I'm talking about the exact moment of, hour, time, alignment of the full moon.
That's interesting. That's the one planetary body that people recognize there's a relationship to ourselves. But all the heavenly bodies have much more subtle relationships. But the moon is something that most people recognize has some sort of relationship to us. Now, I'd like to talk about the poem. That poem was written by my mentor, who was the reincarnated Socrates. And I use that poem quite a bit to meditate on. That really summarizes what this program is about. Did any of you appreciate that poem at all? And in what way? Bill, do you know what I'm talking about? The poem that's at the very end of the...
Unfortunately, Don, I
At the very end of what?
Is it the end of one of the books?
That's the end of the lecture guide.
Oh.
And the beginning is love.
It's been so long since I read it, that one I can't speak to it, I'm afraid, Andrew.
Liz, have you got it there in front of you?
Oh, yeah, I do.
Read it out loud to all of us. It's very short.
Okay, sure. In the beginning is love. Love experiences itself as light in the Word. The Word that is light creates life. Life expresses itself in matter as law. Law awakens in death to rebirth in freedom. Freedom illuminates wisdom through revelation. Wisdom transforms itself into the creative activity of human love.
It's something that I find so important. I read and reread that all the time. The going from divine love to human love, and that's what we're all engaged in. How do we manifest human love, and how is that different, and how is that evolved from divine love? And that poem gives you the whole. You talk about epochs. See, there's a lot of time that went into these different epochs in terms of that poem.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a man who was unknown in this lifetime, and he was so deep and so amazing and completely unappreciated in this world. But that was my teacher. And if you look at that poem and just really meditate on that poem, you'll see that this is what our seminar is about. And you can see it in, say, when you go back to, the question at the beginning of the essay, what is love? And then how Plato had his hand at this. It's very interesting. I mean, that symposium is a fantastic work of art. And that's how Plato tried to bring this into the world.
To me, if you start with the word love experiences itself, I can only interpret this as God, because only God can experience itself, and the God in us experiences the things we do. So love is equal to God in the beginning of this poem for me. I feel that it is God experiencing himself, but we call it love here, but God is love. Love is God, so that's why we can't define it definitely, because every definition is going to be lacking in some way. You cannot describe it. It's impossible to describe love if it is the same thing as God, or all that is, or whatever you want to call it.
That's marvelous, Gordon, and that's why that's not good enough, because it has to evolve, and then it separates, and then it evolves into these different stages, and then yes.
Well, I think that every time we have some kind of initiation, something happens in our hearts and it activates a new way of seeing. And that's when love evolves. Every time we have an initiation, love evolves within us, because we activate something new in ourselves and we look at the world with different eyes. So I think that's why we're talking about initiation all the time, because the evolving process is through this initiation, and love evolves the same way. I don't know if it makes any sense to you what I'm saying. It makes sense in my head, but I don't know if it makes sense to you.
To me it does. That was, again, one of these insights that really transformed me. How love itself has evolved. There was no word for conscience. You go back in history a bit, until the time right at the time of Socrates, where conscience comes into the language. And then there was no word for agape. You see how Plato goes as far as really doesn't even go to philia. Mm-hmm. So you can see in Plato's Symposium, and then compare it with Aristotle, how there's an evolution of love between those two, and then between those two, and then the Gospel of St. John, where agape first comes. And then, because this was so deep when I first put my hands on this work, that there's a love that comes beyond what we discuss in the essay, and that is sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And when you give your life for somebody else, that goes beyond agape even.
When you're describing this evolution of love, it sounds to me as when we are scientifically trying to understand what the universe is. So we discover new places all the time, and when we discover a new star or a new galaxy or whatever, we give it a name, and then it comes into our awareness, and it exists. So that's how we are doing the same thing with love. We're experiencing it and finding new ways and giving it names so that we can incorporate it into our reality. And I think it's the same thing as exploring the universe, exploring love.
Yes, imagine in English has one word for love, love, and of course that's ridiculous. Like the Eskimos have so many different words for snow. We have to start developing different words for these different states.
Hmm. Another thing.
There's one line in that poem I can't go anywhere with. That is life. Okay, get down.
No, please, Bill, go ahead.
Okay. Now, I was going to say there was one line in there I can't go anywhere with it, and that's the one, life expresses itself in matter as law. Mm-hmm. It just stops me cold.
Well, this, I love the Bible. The Bible is really a story of this, just what you're asking, Bill. There was no need for religion if you go back far enough. And prehistory, there was no religion at all. Religion, science, and art were all merged into one. And then you evolve, and then there was a time where you needed law. And the Old Testament is filled with law. And the New Testament is where you don't need law anymore. Not that you're a criminal anymore, but with love, real love, you don't need law. So that's why what you were puzzling over, Bill, is just one of the stages of the epochs that Liz was talking about, where there's an evolvement where you then generate law, where you need law. Human beings need law.
That's interesting because I looked at that as life expressing itself in matter, in form, and in natural laws. And in those natural laws, we awaken to this sense of reincarnation, of arising and passing away of all things, of life and death. And in that acknowledgement of kind of a universal law, we find freedom. And that's the way that I saw that.
This is the beauty of poetry. It's open. You know, this man was did not have any doctrines or dogmas to follow, and he expressed himself through poetry. And he was not a good public speaker either. He had a really interesting, really deep man. His wife didn't understand him at all. His children didn't either. And a real great initiate. You talk about initiation. This was how a modern initiate appeared in the world, where nobody really knew him very much.
I was also thinking about this passage, life expresses itself in matter as law. And I was thinking that before we get into this physical life, we are all that is. And when we come into this physical life, we have to obey certain laws. For instance, we live in a dualistic reality where we have the choice between good and not so good, love and hate, fear and joy. Everything is dualistic, and that's one kind of law that we cannot avoid it. We have to face it, and that's the beauty of being a human being. When we're not humans, we do not have to make those choices because we know everything. And it's in the choices where we can do this work of evolving ourselves. So I think that for me, that's the law he's talking about. That we're in this physical reality and we're forced to follow certain laws just to evolve ourselves.
That's
It's a
interesting.
little bit of something, it's the
Also
same
brings
thing
up
almost
something-
as his.
Also brings up something we mentioned earlier, sequences. I mean, and who is ready for what? I mean, some people, I look back at some people in this world or some societies in this world, and again, I have compassion for it because I know that that was a state that I was in. But the same thing with what you're describing, Gordana, that whole sequence of that poem can certainly be part of one lifetime. But for other people, no. As I say, a couple of thousand years it took me to understand some things that are now ABC to me. I mean, that's the way it works.
It seems
Yeah,
to
there's
be,
always a preparedness for the next stage or the next level.
Yes. Now, does anybody have any comments about what this seminar activity does? Does it wake us up at all? Does it give us insights? Is there something here that can begin to change our lives or have changed our lives? Let's start with that. Would anybody like to start first? Now, I'll start first. For me, it's always instructive. I get so much out of the people that I'm meeting. You can't believe it. First of all, confidence that I can talk these issues with people. It's so hard to talk about these things to so-called normal people. So to begin with, I want to thank you all for this experience, which I find is very, very rewarding for me, particularly.
for me, it's been a really great experience to see y'all and know there are kindred spirits out there that you can say what you are experiencing and feeling, and that's just really, for me, just I can't tell you how much that means to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Becky.
I completely agree with you. Just to be able to talk about issues like love, for instance, everybody is taking it for granted in our society that love is one thing, and we're looking at it from a lot of different perspectives, and that's really illuminating for me. Being forced to think about common things as love or whatever we're talking about, and look at it from different perspectives. It's really very illuminating for me.
For me, it's incredibly comforting and informative, but also just provides a confirmation of sorts that I'm not alone, a deeper connection. To talk about things like this, there's no greater place that I'd like to be. And I just find such resonance here, and this nodding, this acknowledgement of each other here. And for me, that is absolutely priceless, just precious to me.
Thank you, Liz. Bill, anything?
Yeah, for me, sure, I can agree with everything that's come up so far, and maybe beyond that from my perspective, and that is just, it's very expansive. It gives me new distinctions, opens up new ways to look and consider things that I would never have considered before, and just the ability to associate with people like this and talk about these things is immense value.
Carly, last but not least.
Yeah, I think these forums are always a way for people that feel, I think for some people they feel isolated and they don't feel like they can talk about these types of subjects. So finding groups that you can, talk about, love and consciousness and reincarnation is a way for people to, get out their different philosophies or thoughts on it and expand. I mean, it all boils down to, my three phrases are always learning, playing, and growing. So I think in any environment that we're in, that allows us to learn and play and grow through the experiences of other people's experiences, through their conversation, their own personal theologies, ideologies, or philosophies. So, it's a choice to expand.
Well, thank you all very, very much, and I'll be in touch with all of you through the weeks and months. Goodbye. Have a good day. Have a good week.
Okay, thanks. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Namaste.
Bye. Namaste.
Bill,
Yes.
can you hear me? Can we talk in a couple of hours on Skype?
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you. Bye.